Just whoever's talking is going to come. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Mary Balliet. This is our first of patient education. Well, actually, I did one other one on the pelvic floor, but this is one of my favorite postgrads that I do for the doctors. But this I decided to do more aimed for the patient. So please share this with your friends and let everyone know why this is so important. This is a topic I've been very, very interested in, which I call more than a feeling, food and mood. And so we can see someone with their food and mood, right? So I thought that was just adorable. So what's interesting, I got interested in what feelings are in 1997 when Candace Pert wrote this wonderful book called Molecules of Motion. And so what Candace Pert, who actually won a prize for discovering the endorphin receptor in the brain, she showed that our feelings, that's over here, are actually brain chemicals known as neurotransmitters. And that these neurotransmitters have both a physiological function and an emotional function. So when we see all these emotions over here, there's actually a physiological impact of these exact same molecules. And we're going to talk about what is the physiological thing that they do for us, as well as how do we feel. And so we sort of feel in our body, but we also feel in our limbic system. And each of these feelings has a unique neurotransmitter. And so that's what we're going to focus on. So we know everything about this. This is how neurotransmission works. So this is an example of we're going to make serotonin in this example because it's a really interesting thing. And we start with this amino acid called tryptophan, and we're going to talk a lot about the biochemical pathway of converting tryptophan all the way into serotonin. This thing here is called the presynaptic terminal. This is where you make neurotransmitters. They're in these little round things called vesicles. And when you get the right signal, it actually causes this vesicle to fuse with the presynaptic membrane. That's a really fancy term for this thing that's at the beginning. Then all of these little chemicals come out. That would be the neurotransmitter. But what's interesting, they only have an impact when they bind to the receptor. So it's always the receptor that's going to decide how you feel, how you work physiologically, always the receptor. So what happens is, let's say that we're going to make serotonin, we release the neurotransmitter, it binds to the postsynaptic membrane, and we have the feeling of what we're going to call happy. I don't really love that word happy, because there's a great study that showed that happiness is actually math and it is not a feeling. This is actually, serotonin makes you have this feeling like calm, that you just feel calm and you feel good about things. But happiness actually equals reality minus your expectation. And so if your reality is not as good as what you expected, you will be unhappy. But if your reality is better than you expected, you'll be happy. And so two mathematicians actually showed that happiness is math and not a feeling. And that even though we say serotonin is happy, it is not actually the emotion happiness. It is the emotion feeling calm and everything is just right. So how do we support the process? Well, we have to be able to make the neurotransmitter. That takes adequate protein. We have to have enough mitochondria so that we have the energy for that. And in the brain and in the nervous system, that takes good carbohydrates. We need vitamins and minerals to run the mitochondria, and we need really healthy fats because that makes the membrane. And the receptor sits in the membrane like a catcher, and you want to be able to move back and forth in a really fluid membrane so that you can catch that receptor and it has impact right away. You're not missing the ball, so to speak. And that's one of the most important roles of healthy fat, in that what's called postsynaptic membrane, so that the receptor can move and actually get that to really have a lot of impact. So that shows all of that there. And then of course we want to be hydrated. Now, what's interesting is that when we're saying, I love this slide, I found this on the web called the happy hormones. Now, happiness is again math. You feel better than you are, your reality and your expectation are matched up. So what happens is the one we're really going to talk a lot about is dopamine. Dopamine is actually called your reward hormone. It actually is the trophy. You feel some bliss, you feel motivated, you concentrating, you can learn when you have your dopamine receptor. That's super important. And if you don't have enough dopamine, we're going to see that is bad. That's going to be pattern 1, a depleted dopamine. Now, I don't feel rewarded. Now, you would think the opposite of reward would be unrewarded, but it turns out the opposite of rewarded is anxiety, which is really interesting. Serotonin is what we just saw where they're talking about happiness, but truthfully, look what it says. It is about being calm and feeling well-being. We kind of call that happy because we say, well, if we are calm and we have a feeling of well-being, our reality and our expectation are matched up. But serotonin, truthfully, is just this feeling of calm and I feel well. We're not going to talk about oxytocin and endorphins in this presentation, but oxytocin is the love hormone. I'm going to do a whole talk on oxytocin probably in June. It's one of my favorite neurochemicals. I've probably read 100 papers on oxytocin. And when we look at oxytocin, and so interesting on the list of what it is, when it says anti-stress, that is predominantly for women. Men really feel much less stressed out when they have enough dopamine, and women need oxytocin after their dopamine runs out. So we'll talk about that in its own presentation. And then the natural opioids are the endorphins. These are the things you make when you exercise, and that's what gets rid of pain and can make you have this feeling of joy. They say pleasure, but endorphins are really joy and happiness, math, joy, endorphins. Now, not on this list is the sort of less than happy hormones, which is glutamate, where we have a glutamate too much and a GABA too little. And we're going to see that everything is a yin-yang balance. So we're going to see that we're only one neurochemical different between dopamine and norepinephrine, and then we can have too much or too little serotonin, and then too much glutamate or not enough GABA, or vice versa. But I found this and I thought this was really kind of cool, so that you understand that these things have multiple things. They have an emotion, as well as we're going to see they also have a physiological function. So in pattern number 1, this is the person who is anxious. These are the people who have diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder. This is truly that you were in fight or flight. You're having a lot of trouble being in rest and digest. These are the people who say, I just don't really feel like I can eat. I'm just too upset to eat. I can't fall asleep. I can't stay asleep. I'm in this fight or flight. Something bad's going to happen and I got to do something about it. Now, unfortunately, because dopamine is a reward chemical, then we're going to see when I don't have enough dopamine, I'll be driven to addiction behavior. The second pattern we're going to talk about is the imbalance between having a panic attack and being depressed and worried. When my serotonin is just right, I feel calm and I have a sense of well-being. Too much serotonin, we're going to feel panicky, and too little, we're going to feel depressed. And this is a feeling sick to my stomach pattern, because we're going to see the intestines are the largest producer of serotonin. And women have way more serotonin receptors, and men have way more dopamine receptors. And so therefore, women really get sick to their stomach more than men, which is super interesting. The third one is the anxiety, not this anxiety, which is so weird. This is an anxiety, worry, or depression that's due to overthinking. This is where it gets really confusing, because we have anxiety that's due to too little dopamine. We can have panic that's due to too much serotonin, but we can have a combination pattern, because why not? Where now we're anxious, worried, and depressed. That's super great because we're overthinking. This is what's called tired but wired. This is the go, go, go. I cannot stop. I cannot relax. This is chronic anxiety, chronic pain, maybe a little OCD. Can't leave dishes in the sink. I say I'm going to go to bed, takes me 45 minutes because I'm cleaning the whole house before I could lay down. This is a really interesting pattern. This is the glutamate GABA pattern. Super important to figure out, do I have this, do I have this, or do I have this? And they are out of balance because they're always on the seesaw. One thing's up, one thing's down. So where is this happening? Pattern 1, which is the fight or flight, is in what's called your sympathetic chain ganglia and your adrenals. So we know so many people, like many of us have been either told that we have adrenal fatigue, or we say that we have all this pain in the middle of our upper back. We're like, oh, my shoulders are so tight, or my low back aches. The sympathetic chain ganglia runs from your neck all the way down to your tailbone. And so the whole thing, fight or flight, yay. And then the adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys, so they sit right under your diaphragm. And you can get a thing known as adrenal fatigue. The second one is in your intestines. That is because serotonin is the largest producer. They showed around 2003 that serotonin is mainly made in the colon. And it's really important for the intestines to work that you're in a parasympathetic environment, which is your vagus nerve, which is right between your head and your neck. So right underneath your skull. If those points are really tender, your vagus nerve is having trouble really getting enough energy to your body to calm your system down. And then it's also at your tailbone. This is why some people go to practitioners known as cranial sacral therapists, that kind of, when you feel just wound up too tight, and then it kind of unravels you, and then you can feel a little bit better because you're kind of wrung out like a dish rag. That would be this pattern. And then the third pattern actually is in your brain. This is a brain thing. Daniel Amen wrote a great book about the brain. And he had many different patterns, but this main pattern we're talking about, this glutamate dominance pattern, where I cannot relax, that is the brain pattern of number 3. So let's do them one by one. So pattern 1 is my favorite thing for me to have, is my generalized anxiety disorder. I can get really restless. I can be tired and wired. I can be thinking that, what does my acupuncturist say? Catastrophizing is my cardio. So that cracks me up. I could actually have a little sore muscles because we're going to see adrenaline restricts my blood flow. I won't be able to think as well because now I'm not getting good blood flow to my brain. We're going to see why. And that's going to make me irritable, but also I'm in fight or flight. So you have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. And so what happens is, because anxiety is an emotion feeling by tension and worried thoughts, and due to epinephrine and norepinephrine, I'm going to have more blood pressure, and I'm going to have a higher heart rate, and I'm going to feel a little fearful. All right. It's not the same as fear, but it is the feeling you have just before you are afraid. And so fear is norepinephrine and anxiety is dopamine goes down. So they tend to go hand in hand. Anxiety, intriguingly, has to do with when you're not in the moment. And this is why we'll see that mindfulness is super important for anxiety, because you're worrying about what's going to happen, or you're worried about what already did happen. And so you're focusing on this sort of, I love this word, diffuse threat. Not one thing. We're going to see that's a serotonin thing. I have a test on Friday I got to study for. Great. I don't know where to start. I have all these notes to look at. That's more anxiety. That is diffuse. And what happens is I find that I have a threat, but I just have this anxiety about it, but it feels like a threat. That's very important in this. Not feeling safe is anxiety. It turns out from 2001 to 2003, the reason I'm putting up these numbers is we're going to see how much worse this got in COVID. So if you see overall, about 19% of everybody was anxious in the US. So that's a lot of people. That's 1 in 5 people was anxious. So that's a lot. And we can see that anxiety goes down as you're older in the old days. So you were the sort of the most anxious when you're working really hard and trying to make, go to school, get a job, you got to really produce. And then once you kind of arrive, you might be a little less anxious. Oh, but that did not work out. So what happened is that the pandemic made people feel more anxious, that's this pattern, but also more depressed, which is pattern number 3. And so unfortunately, everything got horrible. If you look at anxiety, because we didn't know what was wrong, it was a threat. Everyone felt like a huge threat. In December of 2020, we almost have 40%. And when we got having anxiety or depression, literally over 40% of everybody in the midst of COVID was anxious and depressed. So crazy. Now, we're not going down a lot. I want to point out that when we're looking at December 2021, remember we were at 19 in 2003. Look at these numbers. This is a lot of people that are either anxious or depressed, and this has had a massive impact. Now, we don't have the numbers for 2024, which I found intriguing, but they do not look like they are going down. So that brings us then up to depression. So since they kind of go hand in hand, I wanted to do them first so that we understand that they're not exactly the same. Remember, not safe, I feel a threat. But depression is a mood disorder that affects how the person feels, thinks, and handles their daily activities. They might feel sad, but more in a hopeless way. Not like something happened and that hurt my feelings and I'm crying. Now I feel kind of hopeless. I'm exhausted. Unfortunately, this is the group who may want to be like, I'm done with this, which unfortunately is a permanent solution to an immediate problem, not a best choice, of course. They're going to have trouble with their eating behavior because serotonin is in the gut. These are the people who are going to eat under stress. So they are likely to be a stress eater, and they're going to have a lot of trouble sleeping, and they're going to start losing interest in things they like. And then they're going to be like, oh, I don't know what to do. And so when we say they're anxious, they're not quite the same as the other anxious. It's not because they have a threat, it's more that they have lost interest and they're hopeless. And so it's really important because of the self-harm piece for adolescents in particular to be very, very cautious about the medication, and that they must be co-managed with a medical doctor, a therapist, if they're going to be on any medication, because we cannot start fooling around with this when you're depressed. So let's take a look at 2021. Here are the depressions. So overall, less people have a major depressive episode. The major depressive episodes are the ones where you have to be genuinely concerned. I'm kind of depressed. I'm having trouble getting off the couch. I just want to watch Netflix. Sure, that may be what this group is doing in the 18 to 25-year-olds. They're like going to be in withdrawal and they're not going to be able to get their work done. But when you look at the rest of them, it's not quite as bad. Bizarrely, as not feeling safe is way more common. So anxiety is more common than a major depressive episode. Because anxiety and depression are different, the correct diagnosis is critical. If I treat somebody for anxiety when they're depressed, they're going to get worse. And if I treat them for depression, If I treat them for anxiety when they're depressed, that's very bad. But if I feed the opposite way, it's also really bad because of the way the neurochemicals work. I'm going to get a big side effect. So we really want to know that. We want to have a great diagnosis because then we're going to know what to do. So what we have to say is we really want to be just right. We don't want to be too hot and we don't want to be too cold. We want to find that yin yang balance of these neurotransmitters because of the way the biochem works. I felt compelled to put the intense biochemistry on this page for the autonomic nervous system because this has so many impacts when we are talking about when you have food cravings. What is interesting about both of them is they're going to start with two different amino acids. For anxiety, you start with tyrosine. Now, the reason this matters is because tyrosine is also needed to make thyroid hormone. And this is why when people are very anxious, it can look like their thyroid is decreased because they are using their tyrosine to do this, to make norepinephrine and epinephrine. This is our chemical here, dopamine. This one here makes you feel satisfied. Now, what's interesting is that we do need B6 here and B1 to do this step. When we are on birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, antibiotics, we can get B6 deficient and we're going to have trouble even making our dopamine. And so we're going to, if we can't make our own, we're going to want to have something that is going to bind to our dopamine receptor so that we don't have to make it because something else is going to bind to the dopamine receptor. Who are those things? Things like alcohol or drugs, not LSD, only one that doesn't bind to the dopamine receptor. Most other recreational drugs all bind to dopamine. Thinking you're in love binds to the dopamine receptor, as in the song Addicted to Love. And so that's what's interesting about that. And then physical intimacy also binds to the dopamine receptor. So I have a mnemonic. I'm putting this on the website anyway, which I call the Wine Dine 69 and then cry about it circuit, because it turns out when your dopamine goes down, you will start crying. So it's very interesting. Now, to convert dopamine to norepinephrine, because you are afraid, that's a vitamin C dependent enzyme. Every animal except human beings and guinea pigs can make vitamin C from sugar, and this is that wicked sugar craving. I recommend that people get a vitamin C lozenge or vitamin C gummy, something that tastes sweet, and do one every 20 minutes till the sugar craving goes away, because it will once you give your body enough vitamin C. Norepinephrine has a way overarching pattern where it's going to suck out the vitamin C over every other pathway, because we have in our nervous system from the top of our neck to the bottom of our spine, the sympathetic chain ganglia. And so it's made everywhere. And we always have to make some norepinephrine or we would not even be able to get up off the couch. So it's always this balance between enough dopamine and enough norepinephrine. If the deer does run out in front of us, then our adrenal gland makes epinephrine, and that takes a thing called S-adenosylmethionine. And we're going to have a talk about MTHFR and 1-methyl transfers and 1-carbon metabolism. So there's the methyl group that when you give that up, you're going to make homocysteine, and that could cause heart attacks and strokes. And that's why when the deer runs out, you're like, oh my God, I thought I was going to have a stroke. That is epinephrine. That's going to make your heart really beat fast. Norepinephrine is, I am anxious and afraid. Epinephrine, I'm running or I'm fighting. Dopamine, I'm satisfied. Everybody has an actual physiological function. And this, intriguingly, makes you not shake. So unfortunately, sometimes you can have, you can be so hypoglycemic where you have to make epinephrine because you're hangry. You'll actually start shaking because you need L-Dopa not to shake. That's the thing that's missing in Parkinson's. So what do we want to do? We want to have a balance between norepinephrine or adrenaline and epinephrine, and we don't want to be in too much fight or flight and not enough rest and digest. So we want that dopamine and norepinephrine to be even. So we have to be 50% norepinephrine, that's normal, and we want our dopamine to be there. So what do we want to do? We want to have dopamine. I put coffee on here because I feel my coffee makes my dopamine go up. Love my coffee. And so it shows that then I do bind here, and it helps me be motivated and learn and make reasonable things and kind of keep my emotions under control. And I need it for all of these, but I also need it for fine motor control. Otherwise, I will be very shaky. And so that is a sign that you don't have enough protein. And then you also don't have enough B vitamins to make this pathway work. And now I'm going to be satisfied and rewarded. Otherwise, I am the song, I ain't got no satisfaction. When I ain't got no satisfaction, then I have norepinephrine and I start to feel anxious and afraid. So I'm just looking over, not really wanting anybody to see me. That's where I will go into flight. And otherwise, I might have to go into fight. And this is when little kids are like, I don't want to be alone, or I'm afraid of the dark. That is norepinephrine. And we all have this, intriguingly. Now, norepinephrine normally binds to your blood vessels and constricts them, and you want them to be halfway constricted. You don't want them to not constrict at all, because if you drink a lot of alcohol and the blood vessels dilate, you actually turn bright red. So you don't want that. That's not enough norepinephrine. And you want to not have it constrict so much that your hands and feet are cold. Now you can't think because now I don't have enough blood supply. But I want to have the right blood supply so that I can move that blood up into my brain so I can pay attention. And I want to get enough blood to my brain because then I need my white blood cells that are going to fight inflammation. So it's not like I don't want norepinephrine. I do. I just want it to only be at 50%. I don't want it to be at 90%. So norepinephrine and another thing called acetylcholine, they have to be in balance, 50-50. Now I want to get up, norepinephrine goes up, my acetylcholine goes down. I want to lie down or I want to eat, my acetylcholine goes up, my norepinephrine goes down. That is measured by a thing called heart rate variability. And the older we get, the less we are good at having a better heart rate variability. So you can wear one of those devices that checks your heart rate variability, and you want to see that you can recover. That's very important. It's called resilience. And people who are resilient just do better. So how do I do this? Well, one more thing I want to talk about is, what if I go past norepinephrine and go all the way to epinephrine? That's a problem because I'm going to constrict my artery. I teach physiology, or I did till today, but I'm going to still do it for all of you. See how big this vessel is, and this is narrowed. You would say, well, that's not that narrow. But the problem is, if I narrow this vessel by 50%, it's not half as much blood. It's 1/16 as much blood. That is a huge problem. So it's to what's called the power of 4, to the 4th power. So this is why if it really constricts your hands and feet are going to be freezing. Unfortunately, what's going to happen is your heart rate's going to go up, your pupils are going to dilate, your blood vessels are constricting, but intriguingly, you're going to start sweating in your hands and your armpits. That is called that is an adrenergic sweating, not an exercise sweating. And once I constrict those blood vessels, that's it. I shut off digestion. So these are the people who just are not good digesters. And they then can start wanting to eat sugar, especially simple sugars, which are digested in their mouth. And that because they can't digest anything, they definitely can't digest their protein. And so therefore they don't have enough protein. Now I'm going to have more blood sugar, and long-term high levels of blood sugar are very bad for all chronic diseases. And so now I really am in fight or flight. So I want to have them be balanced. I'm feeling rewarded and satisfied, and I can rest and digest, and I'm not an addict. Now, sometimes they give people Xanax for this or Valium. Problem is, doesn't totally work for this, which is weird. But what happens is that, you know, sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. There was a lot of problems in reading all the studies because of the way they did the study, in that they didn't really say whether the person truly was anxious from too much norepinephrine or they were really panicky from too much serotonin. So this is where you have to be super careful. You got to really have somebody that has a really good way to diagnose you. You really need a therapist to figure out, do you actually have generalized anxiety disorder, in which a benzodiazepine is a good only short-term effectiveness, because the benzos bind to the dopamine receptor. They actually bind to this GABA receptor, but they can make you very addicted. So what do I think we should all do? Well, we got to eat and digest. So basically, we might need some digestive enzymes if we're really so stressed out that we're not doing that, unless we can really do some prayer and meditation before we eat. And we want to have a lot of protein, minimum 18% of your calories, up to 30. I kind of aim for 25% of my calories to be protein. And we want to really be at that 1.2 to 2.0 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight's why I made this. You want to make sure you chew your food, because you got to have the carbohydrates with the fiber. That's going to be really important. And that's because fruits and vegetables have vitamin C. And when we're saying, you know, the RDA for vitamin C is only 60, but when, you know, some people might need a lot of extra vitamin C if they're really having a wicked bad sugar craving. I like to have a little bit of fish, eat fish every day, or have a fish oil. There's only 6 companies in the whole country that actually make fish oils. And so you just want to have a good quality one. Sometimes they'll tell you take like 6 grams. That's crazy. 1 to 2 grams more than enough. We want to still have some saturated fat, because if we don't eat fat, then we don't digest our food at all. It's not possible. And we really want to have a lot of polyunsaturated fats. I put the lecithin in there for that reason. And then what's really a problem is we want to decrease our omega-6s, because that's going to make us inflamed. So we want to do those omega-3s, the fish, the flax. Those are really great. And the omega-6s are in when you do a lot of animal protein. So I'm not against some animal protein. I think it's very, very important to have enough protein. What we want to do is we want to have good quality protein, like grass-fed beef and organic chicken. That's going to be fed a better natural food, which will make it not as high in omega-6s. Super important to sleep in this pattern. Lack of sleep, you're absolutely going to make more adrenaline when you don't sleep enough. You want to use that adrenaline, especially that norepinephrine, for exercise. People with this do so much better when they're physically active. And then when you start to feel anxious, the only thing that has been shown to work in the literature is mindfulness meditation, which is super easy to do. It is not about oming. You don't have to be in the yogi pose and om. You just have to take a moment and for 60 seconds, go to your happy place and tell yourself you're safe. That's it. Set your phone, 60 seconds, pick somewhere where you feel safe and tell yourself you're safe for the whole 60 seconds. You might have to do it every hour on the hour, but it is the thing that will literally make you go back to physiologically balanced. Now, in pattern number 2 is really depression and worry versus panicking. In 2003, because people were given Prozac, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, Harvard showed that if you were mismedicated, people got diarrhea. And so we have even that expression, you S the bed, right? that is a panic attack. You have the emotion, oh crap, because you are pooping. That literally is too much serotonin. And this is why we have to be so careful about the meds, because we can go into panic attack. And this is why we don't want to give a serotonin drug to someone who's anxious, because we can drive them into panic. Not good. But if I'm depressed and I'm worried, that whole list, I can't get up, I have no interest, all that, then I may need more serotonin. We're going to talk about things we can do to make more serotonin, because it's a gut thing. And so we have a lot of control over this, but we want to be very cautious if people are on medication. So we start with tryptophan. Now, what's interesting about tryptophan is it's a very high in things like cow dairy, it's high in eggs, it's high in turkey, and it's high in pumpkin. And so all those things, we want to make sure that we have them in the right amount and not too much. So some people actually have an irritable bowel from having too much of those things, because now they make too much serotonin. And if they don't have any of those things, then they don't make enough serotonin. And so that's a problem. I'll point out here that this is the same coenzyme, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, that I needed to make dopamine. And now I needed to make serotonin. If I'm on birth controls, hormone replacement therapy, antibiotics, I can get pyridoxal 5-phosphate deficient. It's critically important to have it in our supplement, because otherwise now I can't make serotonin or I can't make dopamine. Now, serotonin has to become melatonin provided I have this called coenzyme A. Coenzyme A is pantothenic acid. And so I think just about 100% of the RDA, put it in the shake, because we need just the right amount. We're going to sleep better at night, because that is a really important B5, pantothenic acid, active form you make in your liver, coenzyme A. But to make coenzyme A, you have to actually have cruciferous vegetables. You need sulfur in your diet, or you cannot convert B5 or pantothenic acid to the active form coenzyme A. So very important to try to always have 1 serving of cruciferous vegetables every day, and you will sleep so much better. Now, serotonin becomes melatonin in low light. And what I have a whole presentation, and it's on our YouTube channel. I'm going to put it on I'm going to have it put on our website as well. But the importance of sleep and the importance of melatonin, and the fact that if I'm on the computer too late or I'm on my phone late, it actually breaks down the serotonin and I can't make the melatonin. That's the problem with that. Now, if I'm calm, that is really what serotonin does, and I'm regular and I'm sleeping through the night, I am in balance. I want my bowels to be moving, but no diarrhea, no oh crap. And I don't want to have the no crap. All right. So, somebody says, oh, we have this test on Friday, and you're like, no shit, right? That's this. Now I am worried and depressed and I'm constipated. And this is the very best way to tell if your serotonin is in balance, by just checking your bowels. So in 2003, it was Harvard that showed that serotonin is #1 thing, is bowel motility. And so you have to literally serotonin in order to have a bowel movement. However, if I do it too much, I get panicky and then I'm exhausted. And if I do it too little, I'm worried, depressed, and I can't sleep, because I can't make serotonin that is made into melatonin. Again, cow dairy, turkey, eggs, and I forgot to write on the slide, pumpkin super high in tryptophan. And so if you don't want to have pumpkin seeds, throw them in your salad, 1 tablespoon a day, super great on keeping your tryptophan up, because I can't do cow dairy. I'm allergic to it, so that's a problem. You can't take tryptophan as a supplement, because back in the 80s or the early 90s, they were using a microbacteria. They were using a bacteria to make the tryptophan, and they just didn't realize that, oh Lord, that bacteria was also making a neurotoxin, and a bunch of people died. And so then they made DSHEA, the dietary supplement Health and Education Act, and tryptophan was taken off the market, but it really was nothing to do with the tryptophan. It was that this bacteria, they didn't realize they should scan it for other things. This is why we now have to have the labeling. And it's so critically important that everything is checked for what's in there, because they didn't realize there was a neurotoxin. What they do allow you to buy is this 5-hydroxytryptophan, which just puts this OH group on it. This is not a vitamin C dependent pathway. This is a thing called biotin. It's not hard. It's not that hard to get enough of that. It's in basically everything you eat. And then you have to convert this to 5-hydroxytryptamine. That's this one. You take this group off. That's why you need the pyridoxal 5-phosphate for this step. And then you make serotonin. Now, what medication is for serotonin? Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We if you are talking to your friends or you're a healthcare provider, you have to be super, super, super careful if somebody is on an SSRI, because if you change their diet where you're like, hey, you know what you really need is a little bit more cow dairy, turkey, eggs, and pumpkin, and they're on an SSRI, you can give them serotonin syndrome. And now they have a panic attack. Now their bowels are crazy. Now they have terrible diarrhea. And this is the person who, before they were too depressed to get off the couch, now this is the person who will end their life. Very, very cautious on this. So you have to work with the doctors. The doctors have to look at this. Got to be really, really cautious. So I ask every single patient, are they on any of these? Then we have to work with the doctor if we're going to start changing their diet. No St. John's wort. St. John's wort is the #1 most problematic herb on the market. It interferes with your cytochrome P450 system. It way upregulates it. So all the drugs have more problem, but St. John's wort will absolutely give you serotonin syndrome if you're on an SSRI. So absolutely no on the St. John's wort. And if you're on birth control pills and you do St. John's wort, you're going to get pregnant. If you're on antibiotics and you're on St. John's wort, you're not going to kill the bacteria. So I'm just not a fan. It's very pretty though, so it's great in the garden. So, but otherwise, no. Oh, I realize I got to fix this slide on the melatonin. But what do we need again? 1.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight, maybe even up to 2, and fiber. Great book, Potatoes Not Prozac. When I have enough fiber, I stretch the colon and my colon makes serotonin. So the more fiber that you eat, the more serotonin you're going to have, and you're going to have a normal bowel movement, and you're just going to feel so much more well-being. And so we also need zinc to do this. We need the B6, like we said. We need the vitamin C. That's that sugar craving. And what's interesting about the L-glutamine, the reason I like L-glutamine, which is really high in chicken broth, and any chicken, especially on the bone, L-glutamine is the #1 fuel of the intestinal cells. And when you eat chicken on the bone, or you have bone broth, then what happens is your intestines are happy, and that's who's making serotonin for you. And this is why the most common meal that makes you exhausted as soon as the lights go down is, of course, Thanksgiving. So all those things really up in your serotonin. So potatoes definitely are a stretcher of the intestines. Intriguingly, cold potatoes act like fiber. So it's now the summer. So potato salad is 50% of a serving of potato salad is just like eating celery. So how great is that? So warm potatoes can be digested in your body to glucose and can raise your blood sugar, but cold potatoes actually act more like fiber. They're called the resistant starch. They're really great for your intestines. They're really, really great for making serotonin. All potatoes are always great for serotonin. I feel like people went too much wheat and grains when they should have stuck with potatoes. Potatoes also have lithium in them, so they're going to actually help on the next one, on your glutamate receptor. Super good to have that. So I'm just a massive potato fan. And then we need all of these B vitamins, B1, B3, B6. We need manganese and magnesium and iron. So, and you want to schedule sleep. So that's why I put all of these things, not the L-glutamine, but the the actual, I didn't put 5-hydroxytryptophan, but this has tryptophan in it because tryptophan is naturally in the protein that's in the peas. Now, why are people both anxious and depressed? Because they need all the same things to make both dopamine and serotonin. You need vitamin C. If I don't eat good quality fruits and vegetables, somebody's told me, oh, fruit is bad because, you know, they didn't read the literature. Now what's going to happen is I can't do this, right? So that's a problem. What happens if I don't have enough SAMe? I have to have SAMe. It's becomes homocysteine, but I need the B vitamins to remake it, but I have to have it. I need methionine, and methionine is an amino acid that is in the shake. You just want to make sure that you have methionine in your diet, you have adequate protein. I have to have adequate magnesium. This is really, really important. I want to not get iron deficient anemic. This is why women, when they're heavy menstruators, can have an issue. I did not put enough iron for heavy menstruator or really any menstruating women in there. The RDA for iron is 18. The shake has 8 in it. And so you have to add 18 milligram iron bisglycinate is probably my favorite. I've tried everything with everyone for 35 years, and that's the thing that's worked the best for menstruating women to get it up. Everybody else, it's toxic at high doses. The RDA is in the shake. And then the 100% of the B vitamins are in there. And so that's what we did. Now we really have to be cautious that we have the right B6, folic acid, B12, and we have our whole talk on MTHFR on how important it is not to methylate both the folic acid and the B12, because we have to be able to pass that methyl group back and forth. And when we have the both methylated, that's like playing hockey with 2 pucks. It's not how the game is played. It does not work. And we do not want cyanocobalamin because that's not good for you. And so we have a whole talk about that. But the bottom line is birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, and antibiotics all deplete 6, 9, 12, quote unquote, the methylators. And this is why the side effects of all 3 of those end up with joint pain, migraines, cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer. We've really got to have that. And now, not only do we have all those chronic diseases, now we're anxious and depressed as well. So what's beautiful about this is that when we look at this group here and we say, if I'm not anxious and I'm not depressed, I'm actually also helping myself not have chronic diseases. And this is why being stressed out causes chronic diseases. It's biochemical, not because you're stressed out. You know, I have former students of mine on this call. They will tell you I run high strung, but I am not at risk for chronic diseases because I have the nutrition to make sure I don't have too much homocysteine. And that's where you could be a bit high strung, but you don't have to worry that you're going to be horribly anxious or depressed or get chronic diseases, because you're just going to do what you need to do to mitigate that. You know, human beings have been on the planet a long time. Life has been hard forever. So it's just important that we have the right nutrition. This one is the go, 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 tired but fired. This is glutamate. This is unfortunately put in a bunch of foods, which I'm going to tell you should not have if you have too much of this. And then you need this enzyme that's called glutamate decarboxylase or glutamate amino decarboxylase, and you have to make GABA. And this is super important. So we're going to watch this. This is about the glutamate, the GABA receptor. Okay, we'll let this go.
The NMDA receptor is one of 2 main kinds of receptors activated by glutamate. The other main kind of glutamate receptor is called the AMPA receptor. These 2 receptors, each with distinct physiological properties, often coexist at the same synapse. Shown here is a model synapse in the CA1 region of the hippocampus containing both types of receptors. Weak electrical stimulation of the presynaptic neuron causes the release of glutamate from the axon terminal. This glutamate binds to both AMPA and NMDA receptors. Although both NMDA and AMPA receptors are permeable to sodium and potassium ions, weak stimulation normally activates only the AMPA receptors, resulting in a slight depolarization of the postsynaptic neuron. When glutamate binds to the NMDA receptor at slightly depolarized or resting membrane voltages, very few ions flow through the channel. This low conductance occurs because the pore of the channel is blocked by magnesium ions, which prevents other ions from passing freely through the channel. Under such conditions, the EPSP will be mediated entirely by the AMPA receptors. Given a stimulus of sufficient strength or frequency, AMPA receptors can depolarize the membrane sufficiently to expel the magnesium from the NMDA channel. The NMDA channel now actively responds to glutamate, admitting not only sodium ions, but large amounts of calcium as well. The calcium acts as an important second messenger, activating several intracellular signaling cascades.
I just want to point out that without the calcium coming in, you can't learn. So it's not like glutamate is bad. It's just that we don't want to overreact. And so that's what makes this super interesting when we think about this, where we want to be at the right amount. So glutamate turns your brain on like a light switch, but GABA functions as the dimmer, because glutamate will turn the light on and then GABA will just have it be the right amount of light so that you can focus. You're awake and focused. They have to work together. What about if I'm magnesium deficient? I drink a lot of coffee and tea, say, which I love, and now my magnesium gets depleted because in a diuretic situation, like alcohol or like a lot of coffee and tea, I'm going to actually pee out all my magnesium. I'm going to need to take more magnesium. What if I'm on birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, or antibiotics? I'm going to get magnesium deficient because of the way I have to run my liver to detoxify those. And so what happens is if I don't have enough magnesium, I am hyper. 80% of Americans are magnesium deficient. This is why we are all a little hyperactive. So I think we have an issue here. And where do I get magnesium? Magnesium is in chlorophyll. That's anything that's green. You got to eat 2 or 3 cups of green things a day. It's in nuts and it's in chocolate. So greens, nuts, chocolate. Well, I put magnesium in the shake. It's chocolate, and I recommend they eat some nuts with it. If not with the shake, but sometime during the day, 1/4 cup of nuts for women, 1/2 cup of nuts a day for men. People ate nuts and seeds for thousands of years because we need this magnesium. And this is why I think when you're not having nuts, you're not having seeds, you're not having chocolate, you're not having greens, you're going to be magnesium deficient. You're going to be in that 80%. And now you're going to be hyper. And so now you can't stop, you have a bit of OCD, you're in chronic pain. And now I have this new kind of anxiety, this kind of like, that kind of feeling. So what happens is if I have too much glutamate, then everyone's like, oh, you're a little manic. And then if I have too much GABA, then I'm depressed. So this is really the biochemistry of, if I'm severe, they might say you have a little bipolar disorder, but I think this is more when the people are go, 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 and everybody's like, oh, you are the Tasmanian devil because you're running around the house cleaning everything. That is a glutamate dominant kind of thing. Cannot sit down. Your sweetie is saying, oh, just sit down and watch this movie. And you're like, oh, I can't. I have one more thing to do. That's glutamate dominant. You might want to have a little magnesium, and that might help out. This also takes manganese as well. Manganese is high in nuts. And I made sure I put some manganese in the shake because you can get manganese deficient. It's not really in the soil like it used to be. And again, the B1, B6, we already said, birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, antibiotics, all going to deplete those. So we want to have the right amount of glutamate so we can calmly think and focus. And we want to be able to sleep. If we are glutamate dominant, we cannot sleep. So our brain is going, we're going to have nightmares, or waking up in the middle of the night thinking about the to-do list. And so that's a problem. When we can sleep and we make our to-do list and we can make those and we can cross them off in a stable, calm, dependable way, then we know our glutamate and GABA is balanced. So this is a lot of times where they put you on the Xanax and the Valium for glutamate dominance. And they're unfortunately very, very addictive. And that's the problem. Do they work? They work like a charm. But they are good in the short term if something horrible is happening and you need to be on it. I do think it's important to have this if you have glutamate dominance, but it's just also equally important to make sure you have enough magnesium. But for the short haul, it's not a bad thing. What are the side effects? Unfortunately, they do help you fall asleep, but they deplete melatonin. So you're not going to get a restful night's sleep, but you will fall asleep. But your sleep is going to be really poor. So if you're on a benzo, then you have to take 1 milligram of melatonin. So say you were in a horrible accident and you've been, you really cannot, you're in too much pain. And then they say have some Xanax, you actually have to take 1 milligram of melatonin or it won't be a restful night at all. So what we want to do is only have 1 to 3 on the melatonin. I read way more studies than this 2014 study. Do the smallest amount of melatonin. You really want to force your body to make melatonin by having the potatoes, by having all of the things that help you make tryptophan, and have your B vitamins so that you can take the smallest possible amount of melatonin and force your brain to make it. It's a very important hormone with way other things. You don't want to be always taking it. So what do I want to do? Same thing as always, have enough protein, but now I really want to have nuts and seeds as my protein because they're going to also have magnesium. Intriguingly, bananas and fish are really good in this pattern because of all of the other nutrients that they have. We want to have a really good magnesium to calcium ratio. A lot of people, if they're doing a lot of dairy, they have a lot of calcium, but not enough magnesium. That's really a problematic ratio. Really like to have about a 1-to-1, could be as much as you can have 1 to 2 kind of. You can have 2 to 1 more calcium than magnesium, but you don't want to have more than that. And then again, we need those B vitamins and the manganese. And then you want to have enough glutamate to make GABA, but what you don't want to have is excess glutamate like MSG. They hide MSG in food as hydrolyzed soy protein or hydrolyzed protein. This is going to make a person who has this behavior much worse. But this is why sometimes when you're exhausted, you're like, oh, let's get Chinese food, honey, because it's going to jazz you up. And really try to schedule and have really good sleep hygiene. But I have the right ratio of magnesium to calcium in the shake for this very reason, because of this particular thing.